Hello everyone, and welcome to the 14th annual Design for Drupal Boston. My name's Leslie Glynn, and I'm a volunteer here at Design for Drupal Boston, along with Patrick Corbett, who usually does the introductions and the Q&A, but he is not able to join us today, so I will be doing those tasks as well. For those of you who are new to Design for Drupal, we have an annual event devoted to design, UX, front-end development, as well as business and process challenges facing Drupal teams. We're typically an in-person event. We've been holding it at MIT for a number of years. We usually hold it in the summer. So that's in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right next door to Boston. But in its place, we have not started in person yet. We're holding these monthly webinars on various Drupal design and front-end topics. We do anticipate in 2023 having an in-person event in the summer, and we'll keep you posted as our plans, as our plans come together for that. We're supported by a great group of volunteers, including Catherine Carruthers, who was doing those introductions there. Catherine handles all the recordings, and Catherine Waldron, who handles all of our social media and our mailings. All right, so I will now go through a few slides, just talking about the community and some things of interest to attendees. By the way, on this front screen, I did make a bit.ly to the slides because there's a lot of good links in the slides. So this is just for the general information. It's bit.ly, and it's all lowercase D4D NOV 22, if you'd like the slides to this. All right, so today's webinar, our November 2022 webinar, is on how to involve your internal stakeholders in the UX discovery. Anika Oser from Evolving Web, she's a UX designer. She will be presenting, as well as Vong Tong, who's the design director at Evolving Web. We'll introduce them in a minute as soon as we go over these general pieces of information. So thank you both, Anika and Vong, for joining us. We did have a virtual keynote back in June in place of our annual event. Sharon Steed spoke about developing sustainable empathy systems. There is a link to the recording here, so if you get the bit.ly link or just look up at the Design for Drupal YouTube channel, and you'll be able to see Sharon's keynote if you weren't able to join us back in June. Part of that June day, our main event day, was Drupal contributions. So it's important to keep giving back to the Drupal community. There's a lot of Slack channels that I have posted here that you can go into the Drupal Slack and join any of these channels. Everyone's welcome, regardless of whether you're brand new to Drupal or you're, experienced front end or themer, coder, documentation. Everything is needed. Accessibility, testing. So whatever you would like to help with, there's something for you. And mentors are available on all of these channels, so just reach out and ask. Just say, I'm new to contributing, how can I help out? And they'll give you something of interest to help with. We have several other webinars in the pipeline for December through March. I've been talking to a lot of different speakers. Haven't really firmed up any specific dates or topic. I have some dates, but not specific topics yet. So folks are still working on exactly what they want to present. So announcements will be coming out soon for those upcoming webinars. If you have any ideas for speakers, going forward, just reach out. The email is boston@design4drupal.org. And the recordings will all be available on the YouTube channel after each one of the webinars. Community events, some things that are upcoming. So DrupalCon North America, the next one is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, on June 5th to 8th of 2023. The link is there, but that's exciting. It's on the East Coast finally. A lot of them have been on the West Coast recently, so having a DrupalCon on the East Coast of the United States is exciting. For those of you who are joining who are international, DrupalCon Lille is October 17th to 2023. That looks to be really exciting. So keep that in mind as well. I went to DrupalCon Prague, and it's a little different from the North America DrupalCons. There's a lot of community. There's a lot of excitement. DrupalCon North America is, there's a lot of corporate I mean, there's great participation from the community in both of them. But if you've never been to an international, you could try to go to that one as well. Very, very exciting. Well, other events that are coming up, October 17th to 19th, which is tomorrow through Saturday, is a Drupal 10 Global Porting Day. That's a contribution event. It is virtual. So, check out on the Drupal Slack channels and participate in that. Again, everybody's welcome to join, and it would be a big help getting Drupal 10 ready to be released very soon. October 18th and 19th, which is Friday and Saturday, New England Drupal Camp is being held in person in Providence, Rhode Island. The URL is nedcamp.org. Sign up if you haven't already. There's trainings and contributions on Friday, and there are sessions on Saturday. I'm one of the organizers of that camp. Would love to have additional people come if you're in the area. Then the start of next year, February 17th and 18th is Florida Drupal Camp. March 16th to 18th is Drupal Camp New Jersey. Those are long-standing camps as well. March 17th to 19th, Nerd Summit. That's out in Amherst, Massachusetts. That's going to be in person as well. So keep an eye on all of these and, participate however you can. On December 14th, which was going to be the next Design for Drupal webinar, I'm going to try and move it to the 7th. There's a Drupal 10 launch party. Drupal 10 is being released on December 14th. So all over the world, there are different events. This happens to be a virtual event that I linked to here, but there are events around the world to celebrate the release of Drupal 10. There's a community events page on Drupal.org. It's drupal.org/community/events. All of the things I spoke of here and a lot of other upcoming events, meetups, trainings are on this page. So be sure to bookmark this page and check that out frequently. Code of conduct. So one of the greatest strengths of the Drupal community has always been our inclusiveness, making people feel welcome and included in everything that happens around the Drupal community. So please try to treat everyone with dignity and respect. We do follow the Drupal Code of Conduct. It's in the footer of our website, design4drupal.org. So check it out there. If you have any concerns at all, contact myself or Patrick. And our number's there, 908-4, and then Drupal. We need your help. There are just a couple of us that are trying to keep Design for Drupal going. It's our 14th year. We've had many people help with organizing over the years, but as COVID's happened and people are busy, people have families, we do need some additional help. So anybody that's on the call that would like to help out, please reach out to myself or to Boston at designfordrupal.org. Thank you to our Gold Digital sponsor, Redfin Solutions. Our digital sponsors, let me just read them because it's very important that these companies and individuals support us. EPAM, Dev Collaborative, Atten, Elevated Third, Canopy Studios, Talking Drupal, 108 Degrees, and Pantheon. So thank you to all the sponsors. We could use additional sponsors as well if anybody wants to help us out. Spread the word around about today's event on social media. It's hashtag D4D Boston. So thank you for joining us. Remember to always be kind to everybody that you interact with. The Q&A will be done at the end. So if you can use the Q&A feature of Zoom to ask your questions, we'll ask all the questions at the end of the presentation. And without further ado, let me introduce our speakers for today. So we have two speakers, they're both from Evolving Web. Annika is an experienced UX designer and researcher who has designed countless websites and applications. She helps organizations build intuitive web experiences with her strong creative and problem-solving skills. She has experience in a variety of UX design and research techniques and loves to share her knowledge with folks. Vong's extensive career as the design director touches everything related to design, from branding, web design, motion, and product and services innovation. Vong uses his design thinking to build digital products from the ground up including emotional and psychological, viewing it through emotional and psychological lenses while considering user needs when using the applications that are developed. Today's topic is how to involve your internal stakeholders in the UX discovery, something that I'm very interested in, and I'm sure that you are as well. So welcome, Anika and Vong. Take it away. I'll stop sharing my screen and you can share yours. And thanks everybody for joining.
All right, thank you, everybody. Leslie, thank you so much for the introduction. We're super, super excited to be here. If you're all signed up for how to involve your internal stakeholders in a UX discovery, welcome. If you stumbled upon this by accident, please stay because you'll definitely be learning a whole lot. So as Leslie mentioned, we have, we were introduced, but we'll have ourselves introduce ourselves. Annika.
Hi, everyone. I'm a designer and UX researcher at Evolving Web. We're a web agency, and we have worked with many clients on small and large projects where I often lead the discovery and design phases. And because of that, I get to learn a lot about completely different subject matters from users and stakeholders, which I really enjoy. So I'm excited to share some of our best practices with you.
And I'm Vong Tong, design director at Evolving Web. As mentioned, I have a background in design, print and digital, and it was a time when web were actually flash sites, if you believe it or not. So you definitely come in from a long way. And before Evolving Web, I worked at an innovation consultancy, New York called Fahrenheit 212, leading a team of designers, and then Wix.com to create a design school. So we're looking forward to sharing our learnings with you. So what will we cover? We'll cover a couple things. First is why and when to involve stakeholders in a UX discovery, who to include, how to actually create a questionnaire. And we're not giving you the perfect questionnaire, but we're definitely giving you some guidance around that, and how to get the most value out of stakeholder input. So what is UX discovery? Well, it allows you to really understand business objectives, user needs, success metrics, and create a shared vision. It helps you frame the problem. You can't solve a problem that you don't understand. And so asking those questions are really helpful to really kind of start to paint the landscape. Helps you identify the most important metrics of the project and how you can measure its success. And it also saves you time and money by creating a vision and strategy for the entire team. So almost like a shared place that everyone can align on. Why and when to involve internal stakeholders. So I'll just give you a couple seconds to think about it. Why involve them? Well, Annika, I think click, then we can review. Well, first is learning about everything from business goals, audiences, vision, and priorities. Evolving Web is an agency, so when we are brought into a project, we start as outsiders, and we need to learn as much as possible. If you're an in-house designer, developer, or manager, you do stakeholder research, even if you've already, know some of the answers. And you also want to get support from other departments. If they feel involved and know that they can contribute, they'll be more open to changes, right? So think about those times that you were able to kind of get the input there. And then when to do it? Well, definitely at the beginning of a design project, or at least in parallel to user research, because it helps gather as much input as possible. But maybe you don't have a project yet and feel like you need one. So an internal survey can even help you discover the needs and get support for your project. Now, internal stakeholder research doesn't replace user research, it complements it. Your internal stakeholders are often users of the product or website you're trying to build or improve on. Ask how the website could be improved so they can do a better job. Some typical business needs could be to convert leads, gain more applications, make the phone ring to book a service, or even the opposite. So if a user can find all the information online, the phones will finally stop ringing. And so you'll always want to balance your business and your user needs. So what you can do is you can also run a separate survey with end users if you can. And obviously you'll ask them very different questions to really understand the differences. who do you include, right? I think sometimes we have a tendency to include everybody, but it really depends on the structure and the type of organization. So of course, the larger the organization, the more people usually to involve. And by involving people earlier, they who might have a veto right later, you can avoid surprises. How many of you have been in projects where you kind of finish something to the end, and then the extra person steps in and said, actually, so really have a chance to loop them in a little earlier, at least to give them a heads up, and to get their input. And that definitely includes decision makers. So they help you focus on the right problems to solve. You can ask about their priorities and their vision, and also get buy-in through early involvement of decision makers and departments. You can also get subject matter experts. Often they know a lot about what users need to achieve, as well as the offers and services the organization provides for them, or the difficulties and gaps that currently exist. So you're really discovering pain points, from the ground. And then lastly, the help desk or client services. So you can get insights from stakeholders who are in their customer or user contact. You can get indirect user feedback through support requests and calls with customers that they may have. How to involve them? Firstly is through interviews. So ideal if the number of stakeholders is small. Workshops, ideal for a later stage in the discovery process. So, a little bit more of a smaller group of stakeholders. It's a little bit more dynamic. There's a movement of the group. Water cooler or Slack chats. Now, this probably doesn't work if you're an external consultant, but could be a start if you're working in an organization yourself, and use some kind of, that way to start a conversation. Also questionnaires and surveys, ideal to gather insights from a lot of stakeholders in the very, very beginning.
All right, so we really think that a questionnaire is a great start to gather information from your stakeholders. And what we're going to show you next is what has worked for us the most of the time. So even though we have a questionnaire, a template, each time we start a new project, we slightly modify the questions or select specific questions out of our toolkit. We create our questionnaires with some UX research principles in mind. It's important to write mostly open-ended, non-leading questions. If your question can be answered with a yes or no, you want to revise it. Be very specific in your instructions, but open in the way questions can be answered. We also want to introduce the questionnaire, say why we're doing this and who is involved or what project it belongs to. This gives stakeholders good context. We want to send it to individuals to receive unbiased insights. That means that every stakeholder needs to fill out their own copy or is interviewed individually so that you can spot alignment or misalignment. It's important to clarify potential misalignment with decision makers before moving into design. So next, we're showing you some questions, but again, take them as inspiration and adapt them to your own needs. First, we often ask, list 5 keywords that best describe your new website. We want to know from stakeholders what is really important for them on the project, and we can start to see opportunities with the current site. This could be related to visual design, user experience, functionality, or even content editing. So answers we heard are often adjectives. This could be modern, clear, white space, informative, bright. Next, we often ask what's the first impression you want your website to make? Or you could ask, what words do you want visitors to use when they describe your website? How do you want them to feel after interacting with your website? Now we want stakeholders to think from the end user perspective. What do they think is important for their users? You can also get a feeling for the desired design language. It's really rare that we hear that the user's first impression should be stunned or impressed, but often our clients want that the design reflects better what the organization does. Once a nonprofit corporation told us to not make the design too bells and whistles because they didn't want the public to think that they were spending too much money on web design. So some really important information for the visual design phase of the project. Next, you can ask decision makers to sort audiences into primary, secondary, and tertiary. And this is really important usually. For example, you have a homepage with one hero banner section where you can fit exactly one message. With that, you can only address a certain number of audiences. You can't speak to all of them with one message. And if you miss this crucial step, you might end up hearing requests from stakeholders to create carousels on the homepage to serve different audiences. But the same applies to the main navigation menu. You want it to work for your primary audiences first. But you also need to make sure that it's easy for your secondary audience to find what they are looking for too. The higher the audience's priority, the more focused their content gets. And on the opposite, tertiary audiences won't drive the design decisions. They might have other channels or ways to contact the organization. If you already have company-wide personas, ask your stakeholders to describe the goals and needs of the primary and secondary audiences for this particular section you're working on. Refer to the persona framework if you have that available. And if you get contradicting information, make sure to confirm the audiences with a decision maker in the organization later. In question 4, we ask for feedback from end users about the website or the particular section of the project. Make clear that you're not asking what they think users struggle with. Here we really want to know what they heard directly from users. Anecdotal feedback is better than no feedback at all in our experience. Question 5. Imagine you had a magic wand and could change anything on the website. What is the #1 change you would want to make to improve user experience? Let them make wishes without thinking of technical limitations. We want them to think about the end user experience and not about business needs with this question. Question 5 and 6 go really together. If you're asking one, you also want to ask the next one, where we ask them what is most important to drive their business needs. This could relate to content or the flexibility of creating the content. Sometimes we hear about issues with the current CMS. We learn what project success means. Could be the conversion of sales if it's a shop, but often we deal with goals that are less easy to measure. For example, sign-up rates or application rates could be a goal. Or how often the phone rings or doesn't ring. For one business, it can be essential that customers call to book a service. And for the next, it could be important to reduce the number of calls because the information should be findable on the website. So it's a really important question to decide what calls to action to include later in the design. Next, prioritize importance of website needs. Often stakeholders already have ideas in mind when it comes to functionality, content, or design needs. Here we ask them to describe their initial keywords more in detail and prioritize them. They often include features, content elements, but it could be anything that is important to them. If it's a small number of participants in your survey, you could create this question as an open question. Let them write down up to 6 website needs in the order of importance. If you have a large number of participants, give them a predefined list of about 5 or 6 items to rank, which you can do with a survey tool such as SurveyMonkey. You'll save a lot of time if you can automate the analysis of this question if you're expecting 20 or more responses. Question 8, what elements do you like or dislike on your current website? We want to know, what do stakeholders think works or doesn't work and why? Sometimes we think something doesn't work at all, but the client thinks it does. A way to spot elements that you would dismiss because they're ugly, seem useless or clumsy, but that have been there for a reason. For example, we could hear, I love the color scheme of blue and turquoise, but not the fact that the element is upside down. This feature was introduced before I started to work here. So with this question, we can understand personal preferences, what elements could be removed altogether, or sometimes improved instead of removed. With this last question, we ask about websites from similar organizations that have comparable functionality. This is especially helpful for us working in an agency and often working on new projects and different industries. We really benefit from inspiration here. And we also get an understanding if any of these benchmarks align with the keywords we collected in the very first question. When they said modern, bright, and informative, then do the benchmarks reflect this? Or are the benchmarks a good inspiration for functionality or features or structure only? All right, now back to Vong, who will share some tips for the execution of a questionnaire, what tools we typically use, and what to do if, in fact, we see misalignment between the stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to ask all of you to recall all 9 questions. Definitely, a couple of tools that we use. One is like a survey tool. So think about, Google Forms, SurveyMonkey, Optimal Workshop. Looks super professional, but more importantly, it makes the results easier to analyze and compare. Annika, do you remember this one time?
I once asked over 30 participants to fill out a questionnaire in the format of Word docs. I will never do that again. Since then, I'm using survey tools. It's much, much faster.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I think we all in our careers have learned our lessons to really make the tools work for us. So, I think I echo Annika in the beginning, really be careful with the number of open-ended questions. If you have a large number of participants, being mindful of times it takes to analyze everything, right? So Annika, you had 30 participants filling out Google Docs. So you have to kind of do that. And that's just documents and not questions. So for example, use question types to allow, to sort audience to priorities and also make the analysis a little bit easier. Next one is stakeholder questionnaires. They are not anonymous. Consider different stakeholder roles by including a question to state their names and their roles. This will be important to identify outlier responses. Maybe you also need to watch out for what decision makers have to say. For example, help desk staff don't decide what audiences are primary or secondary audiences. And you can you can filter by sending out different versions of your survey or make certain questions optional. If the number of stakeholders is low, consider maybe an interview instead of a survey. You can ask the same questions, but you have the chance to ask follow-up questions to get clarification. And then be sure to adapt each interview based on the role of the stakeholder. What do you next after you get all the input? I think with Annika's case, there was a lot of reading analysis to do. And I think the most important thing is really to identify the patterns. And a couple tools that we use here is Miro or Mural. You can do a mass import of data from spreadsheets and start to actually put it out and start to see if there are any patterns that you see. But what happens when you see some misalignment? Well, you can follow up with decision makers. For example, if the question is about the primary audiences, you see some discrepancy there. And most importantly is to compare with user research results if you can. Afterwards, share insights and workshop the details. So share a summary and strategy with everybody. Workshop to narrow down identified problems or to remove competing requirements. And involve important stakeholders in the workshop to decide what identified problems have the highest priority to be addressed. I think with a lot of sites or projects, there's going to be countless lists of challenges, issues. So this is a good way to identify and prioritize. But how do you prioritize? Well, you can create a list of high priority items, maybe potential exercises or a prioritization matrix, or even the 4C workshop concept. And you can ideate on the solutions. And the goal is to have important stakeholders sign off on the strategy. Then you can move to design and make final design decisions based on usability tests.
So maybe you're wondering what to do when any of the stakeholder wishes contradict user needs. There will always be competing requirements. Different stakeholders have different requirements, users have different requirements, and that's why it's so important to prioritize them. And in user-centered design, the customer requirements should take precedence. So the solution that worked in my experience, test with real users. If you can prove what actually works, it usually also convinces decision makers to sign off on this.
Exactly. And as we went through our slides and you have some burning questions, feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom, because we have a tracking of it, so we can have a Q&A session. We definitely want this to be as interactive as possible. So I think I gave you the quiz, but here's the answers here, our 9 sample questions. So I'll review them again. This is number 1, 5 keywords. So stakeholder perspective, first impression from the user perspective, prioritizing audiences, user feedback, number 1 user needs, number 1 business needs, prioritizing the website needs, likes and dislikes of the current website, and comparing to benchmark. Annika, anything else to add here?
Well, I think it's always important to remember what the goal of UX discovery is when preparing the questions. You want to understand and frame the problem that you want to solve or that you are asked to solve. You can't solve a problem you don't understand, and that's what we have in mind when we prepare our questionnaires. And you can always do this in form of a survey using the tools we shared. But what I also think is great to remember, if you have a small number of stakeholders, one-on-one interviews are best.
Okay. And you can actually download a free guide. We have a guide. It includes an overview of when, why, and who to include. We have tips and methods for involving stakeholders, and also a handy checklist to help you create a successful questionnaire, analyzing results, and share insights. So this link will be shared with you at a later time. And that was an overview of how to involve stakeholders in your UX discovery process and a part of a larger UX research and design process. Of course, we can sign up for a 2-day event in March. So it's March 7th and 9th, 2023 at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So now we're moving into our Q&A. We see one question already, and do not be shy, everyone else, if you have any questions. Leslie, I just saw that you
Sure. Yep. Thank you so much. Very, very interesting and very worthwhile presentation. So thank you both for doing that today. Our first question is from Catherine. The question is, how many stakeholders are recommended to do discovery?
It really, really depends. There's not a fixed number. I think it's more, if you have an idea how many to involve, then you can adapt the strategy. Either, as I said, do interviews if you have a small number. So if you have 2 or 3, you can get even more information out of those interviews because you can ask follow-up questions. If you have a very large number of stakeholders, then it's easier to do this with a survey tool. But there's no rule of thumb. I think the question you want to ask is who is making the decisions? You definitely want to involve those people, and which stakeholders have most answers for these questions. So again, this could be people involved with the end users, could be people from different departments that have the right answers. So it really depends.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I would also add as well is, think about your constraints. I think with a lot of projects, sometimes we don't have too much time. So, sometimes, involving stakeholders take time. Some people are on vacation or, certain departments. So really consider, the constraints of project and also the goal of what we're trying to do. And I think most importantly, as Annika mentioned, who are actually the decision makers on the project, because we definitely want their input as much as possible.
Right. Yeah, and I had a follow-up question actually, Vaughn, for that. Do you have any tricks or do you have any insights into how to make sure you're involving the right stakeholders so that you don't go all the way down this path, get everything designed, and then at the end of the project, somebody hops in and says, oh, I'm the key stakeholder and I have this differing opinion. So any tricks for how to make sure you have the right group of stakeholders up front?
I definitely have one from more of a project management perspective. Annika, do you have any off the top of mind?
What we usually do is we start to talk to the main project sponsors, and then see from there who they think should be involved. But again, it really depends. But usually you can start with the main decision makers, even do the first interviews with them, and sometimes you then get a better understanding of who else should have different answers, or who knows more about a certain subject matter, and then you can also involve them.
Yeah.
Great.
And something I will also want to add is, I think our topic is about the UX discovery, which is kind of to level set and gather as much information as possible. And I think your question errs more on as the process continues and we get to design and then to development, are those stakeholders, do we continue to update them? And it really depends on the project. But I think as Annika mentioned, who is our point of contact on the client side, and really outlining with them that, the stakeholders that we have in the beginning may not be the same stakeholders that we have, towards the end, because it may involve different departments, but at least for us to highlight that and actually maybe have that as a question in the questionnaire as well.
Mhm. Okay, great. Thank you. We have another question from Rajab. I'll rephrase it. It says, I'll read it to you, and then you can, Rajab, you can clarify if I have it to sing correctly. Are we able to ask about the limitation of the CMS or framework in your questionnaire, or is that out of your list? Is that not something that you entertain as something you ask?
To me, it sounds a bit more like a technical question. And usually in this phase of UX discovery, we don't want to think too much in terms of restrictions or technical limitations. Often in our work, we already have a set of technical requirements. So clients come to us and say, okay, we want this to be updated to Drupal 9 or some Drupal 10, or we need to move from this framework to another one. And that is something that is often already clear either from the beginning. And if not, we also do a separate technical discovery where we ask usually different people what's possible, what are the limitations. But we do this as a separate step because usually those are very different people who answer these questions. And we don't want to be limited by the technology too much when we think about the UX improvements that could be done.
Yeah, I think to build on that is definitely, the purpose of UX discovery, as we said, is really to understand the business objectives and to create a little bit more of an aspirational vision. Because sometimes, with technical requirements, it starts to say, we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this. And what we want to do is kind of change that mindset, trying to get buy-in that it does stem from business needs, but also account for user needs.
Great, thank you. And a follow-up question, I think, on that would be the UX discovery process is your design team. You don't get technical folks involved in the discovery from the agency side. Is that correct? That comes later on after you get your discovery and after you have synthesized and collected all the information, like you said, using a couple of tools that you mentioned. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. When we, for example, when we do workshops as the second step after doing the interviews or questionnaires, then we also involve solution architects just to make sure that we already have an answer if something specific comes up. So we do involve them, but they also have their own more technical workshops as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so I definitely, I think there was a question 8, like what elements do you like or dislike on your current website? And some of those features are more technical remnants or maybe they are kind of product of technical requirements. So, they do start to kind of point and signal to our designers what needs to be there, what doesn't, and that does kind of tie into the technical discovery.
Great, thank you. Just a reminder that the Q&A tab is open. Feel free to ask any additional questions. We'll stay here and answer as many as come in. One that somebody had mentioned to me that it wasn't able to make the webinar was, how long does this UX discovery usually take? Like how long do you give it? It could go on forever with back and forths and, questions and all. Is there typically a limitation on how much discovery is done up front, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, good question. It's not a fixed number of hours or weeks. It really depends on the size of the project. Sometimes we can, if it's a small project and a small number of participants, it's completed in 2 weeks. Other times we have mandates where the whole project is a discovery project where we involve a large number of people and decision makers and all these different stakeholders, and where the goal is to actually come up with a strategy where we don't even do any design yet, or at least not a lot of design, and that can take 3 months.
Great, thank you. I'll relay that information. Let's see. Any other questions? I don't see any more come in. Let me think if anybody else asked me any prior to here. No, but you did mention prioritizing audiences, and I had a question myself on that. You said primary, secondary, tertiary audiences. You did mention personas there, but I wasn't clear on the difference between those different levels of audiences. I think it was audiences, not users. So the levels of audiences, can you explain that a little bit more for me, please?
Yeah, of course. So audiences for me are more groups that you could prioritize into, as you said, primary, secondary, tertiary, but each of these groups could consist of several personas. So persona is even more specific. It's not just the importance to the organization. It could be something very specific, such as a future student or a data analyst, or more something of the actual role. And a current student could be a different persona, or an advisor, or just thinking of some past projects. So sometimes organizations already that we work with, they already have defined personas. And that's great. It already saves us so much time. But often they don't, especially if it's a smaller organization or a smaller project. And then thinking in terms of broad audiences and then prioritize audiences, that already helps us a lot to understand, okay, who are we designing for? And that can even work without specific personas in mind, because creating personas is a whole different task. Usually that's done separately.
Yeah, and audiences are probably a little bit more high level. And for example, with a couple of educational clients we have, their current site is a repository of information for faculty. And, through a questionnaire and through, a UX discovery, we can start to identify, from their marketing team, from, their faculty, from their departments, that they're actually looking for new students to recruit new students. So already just having that as information, hey, it's future students and not necessarily a repository for faculty, we can start to kind of reshape what that experience of the website is. And it's a more high level, it's more just alignment. And as Annika mentioned, persona is a little bit more granular, that it really starts to, we really start to understand more concrete needs for those particular sub-segments.
Excellent. And then when you get into the UX when you get into the user, asking the users, I forget whether it's a workshop or you get users involved, do you select users from those different audiences, more from the primary and fewer from the secondary? And because you might not have the personas defined yet, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, often when we have at least a list of the primary audiences, maybe the persona isn't defined, but we can then start doing user interviews or maybe usability testing of an existing site with those audiences. And with the information that we collect then, we can later build a persona, for example. If we learn about like their pain points and their needs and priorities, that's all the data that is needed to create personas.
Excellent, thank you. Anybody have any last minute questions? Put them in the Q&A now.
I was just thinking, would you consider the content authors as a specific audience? Because I know the last couple of designs we've been through where I work, it was kind of a leftover thing for me to do at the end to create the content, like the kind of staff interface to actually
Mm-hmm.
create all the content. So
It's definitely an important audience, and we often discuss that with our clients as well. They are users of the website, even if the experience is very different. So yeah, we often ask our stakeholders as well, and often it comes up. Usually, those people who are the content creators, they put themselves on the list of audiences as well. And I totally agree. It's important to figure out how important it is, but usually they don't really compete with the end users, just because their needs are often, on the back end, while the end users' needs are on the front end. So it's might be a matter of how much time can you invest into improving the CMS, for example.
Yeah, and also to kind of build off that, they're definitely not most times considered as, like a primary or secondary audience when it's a tertiary. I think more importantly, they are a stakeholder in the process for us to kind of get input, and also sometimes part of the technical discovery that, their pain points are being illuminated there just because there are some pain points that they're experiencing on the CMS side.
Excellent, thank you. We do have two other questions that came in. One is, should we ask about supported devices, screen size ratios, anything like that when you're doing discovery?
We usually don't ask it in these stakeholder questionnaires, just because that is something that should be answered once. We can do this either when we're defining scope. Often we already get those requests. As we're an agency, we that is something that we define separately, but we don't want to know the preferences from 20 different stakeholders on what browsers or screen sizes we should design for. So we ask that separately.
Excellent, thank you. One more question. At your agency, how many staff are conducting these discovery activities? For example, do you have a project manager, UI, UX designer, visual designer, all on the same call? If it's a single person, what blend of content strategy, information architecture, UI, UX design, visual design, and dev understanding does the person need in order to do this research effectively? Let me know if I need to repeat that question.
So we have all these different roles in the agency and on every project usually. And when we are preparing the research, the questionnaire or interviews, like they need to be involved to make sure that we're asking the right questions and make sure that that all these questions are in there, but they don't have to be on the call. I usually prefer it if it's a one-on-one interview or maybe someone in the background to taking notes. I think that gives a better atmosphere to dig into all these details if it's a one-on-one. But yeah, it's important to involve everyone and also to share the insights later with the entire team. I think that's really important in this whole UX discovery. You're creating a strategy and a vision for the entire team, for, in our case, as an agency, for us as the team working on the project, but also for the client on their side.
Excellent, thank you. One final question. It's related. How, when do you coordinate the technical and UX discovery? Is there a tech review before designs go to the client for approval?
Yes, absolutely. We, as I mentioned, we already involve our solutions architect in UX workshops. They also do their own more technical discovery meetings. And yeah, once we move into design, we definitely review our mockups and prototypes with the developers before we send it to our clients for review.
Excellent, thank you. All right, I think that's all the questions. Thank you so much for sharing your information with the community. That's always very helpful. Evolving Web is always very good with that. So we appreciate the time, Vong and Annika, that you took to give the presentation. We will tweet out a link to the ebook on how to involve stakeholders in the UX discovery. So we will be tweeting that out for folks that are on the call. And I think that's all. So thank you so much. Design for Drupal was lucky to have you on for this presentation.
My pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
All right, thank you.